Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Colin Brown, and I'm the Engineering Director at the IMechE, the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. And if there's one thing that you've got to remember from today, it's that this was sponsored by the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and therefore it is mandatory that you all join it. Lifelong, average membership years, 34 years if you join. So you are part of being here today is that you see us and hopefully you decide of your own free will that for the next 34 years, on average, you will be a member of the institution. This is my third year involvement with this challenge, and I think it's a fantastic challenge. And this teaching method that I know is used here in Salford and the other universities, the CDIO teaching method, is one that you will have used and you will be using in working out your challenge and in succeeding today. So I think it's very important that you grasp this idea of conceive, design, implement and operate, because it's applicable to a whole range of activities in life. You've got to conceive what is the problem, what actually is the problem. You've then got to design some sort of solution. You've got to say, well, maybe this would solve that particular problem. You've then, whether you use Meccano or not, you've then got to come up with an implementation. You've got to say, well, if I build this, try this, survey this, force this, then maybe it'll work, and you try it off once. And then if that works, you go on and you operate and you say, well, this will repeatedly will solve that particular problem. And when it doesn't, you start again and you say, well, maybe I didn't understand the problem, and maybe I could conceive of a different problem, design a different solution, try off a different experiment, and repeat some different operation. And in the past, if you'd have been here last year or the year before, I talked about how very useful this is for your love life. But today, because we have a distinguished audience, I won't describe your love life, I will describe how useful this is for global warming. And you can't read this slide, but it's a very famous slide by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which describes that if the temperature of the planet increased by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees across the top, then the sort of things down the left-hand side, which are food, water, ecosystems, extreme weather events, and irreversible events, would start to occur. And there's stuff in there that under 5 degrees, that's average 5 degrees global warming, we would be losing towns, well, you probably don't care, but we'd be losing towns like London, which matters more to me than you, Shanghai, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong. The Amazonian rainforest would collapse, there would be no ice on Greenland, and there would be 1 billion people without water if it were to warm up. So as we're in quiz mode here, can we do the old hands thing again? How many of you believe, we can have the grown-ups do this as well, you can take part, you know, it's not for you. How many of you believe the planet is heating up? How many of you believe at the moment that the planet is heating up? Okay, good. It's going to be a test of circulation, this, because I want you to keep your hands up, please, if you think the planet, and I think the planet is heating up. How many of you believe that humans have got anything to do with that? Keep your hand up if you think that humans have got something to do with that. How many of you then keep your hand up if you believe that there's anything that you personally are going to do, having conceded it's warming up, having conceded that it's humans that are doing it, is there anything you personally are going to do to make that any better? Well, that's fantastic, because unlike Meccano, which went completely wrong for Steve, 40% of the population, and it'll be on the Salford omnibus, I suppose, rather than the Clapham omnibus, 40% of the population of Britain do not believe that the planet is heating up. 40%. Another 50% of the population don't believe that they can do anything about it, that actually it's China or India or America or whatever it is that can do activity about it, do something about it. Only 1 in 10 people think that they can do something about it and prepared to take action. And that was broadly what you showed there. So we're in a situation where 99% of the academic population, 99% of those people who study this, believe the planet is heating up, and they believe that humans are causing it. And yet you go out into the planet and into the world, go into the Salford, and 40% don't even believe it's heating up. So I'm going to use CDIO, conceive, design, implement, operate, to look at that as a kind of a problem that we're trying to solve. So here's a little bit of climate change. There's a Chinese fisherman, not going to be in work for much longer, is he? This is Cockermouth from 10 days ago, and you all know Newton's third law. You've always done Newton's third law, haven't you? Equal and opposite reaction. Why that bloody helicopter doesn't land on the roof, because the force that it's exerting on the roof is equal to its weight anyhow, just happens to be slightly distributed through an airstream, but it might as well sit on the roof. But that's rescuing people in Cockermouth. And this, apparently, though I've never been there, is Melbourne in Australia. And these are people who are concerned about the flooding of Melbourne should sea level rise. So there are people out there who believe climate change is happening, and I just want to use the CDIO technique now to see how they might deal with it. So if I was a scientist, 99% of us believe that it's caused by humans. And the carbon dioxide level for the last 10,000 years, this is irrefutable. Nobody would dispute this data. It's based on ice core information. The carbon dioxide level hasn't changed at all for the last 10,000 years until the last 100 or so years. It's also true of the methane level and the nitrous oxide level and the atmosphere. And nobody disputes this data. What the problem is that if you increase those gases in the atmosphere, it changes the thermal behavior of the atmosphere. So the solar radiation coming in has a different effect, and you have this thing called radiative forcing. So the composition of the atmosphere is changing, and as a result of that, the temperature of the Earth is changing. Didn't say that humans did that, but the composition of the atmosphere is changing, and therefore the temperature of the Earth is changing. So if you actually then just say, well, let's measure the temperature of the Earth for the last 30 years, it has gone up on average by 0.28 degrees. Now, I hope I'm not sounding like a climate campaigner or a green tree hugger. I'm really just trying to show you data that is irrefutable data. The planet has heated by 0.28 degrees in the last 30 years. It, in fact, has got colder in the last 10 years, a fact that many climate deniers would point out. But broadly, so we're conceiving the problem is that there's gases in the atmosphere and somehow they're increasing the temperature. So what are we going to do? We're going to have a meeting about it. We're going to go to Copenhagen next week. None of you could have noticed the fact that we're not having this meeting next week, COP15, occurring in Copenhagen, where we're hoping that all of the governments, senior people in the government, hopefully the presidents and prime ministers will be going to Copenhagen, and they will be doing some sort of deal about gases in the atmosphere. What they're not doing is taking you or me to Copenhagen, and they're not taking manufacturers of devices to Copenhagen. So those of us who, if it is the problem, conceived the problem was gases in the atmosphere, those of us who actually make devices and use them are not going to be there. Governments are going to be there. So you might start to think in this CDIO idea, oh, hang on a minute, if that was the problem, is a governmental arrangement the solution that we want? It might be. Here you've got local government. Ken Livingstone, bless him, February 2003, implemented congestion charging in London. And I live in the congestion zone, and I'm bound to say it has reduced the congestion where I live. This is an early picture. It's now 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. rather than 6:30 p.m. But there's a congestion zone. And what effect did that have? This is irrefutable data. This is the data that came out. This is measurement of the atmosphere in London, emissions in London. And what happened when the congestion charge came in is that nitrous oxide went down 13%, CO2 went down 16%, and particulate emissions from diesels went down by 15% in the first year. And then in the second year, it went down further when people realized, penny dropped, oh my goodness. So we've got an 18.6% in nitrous oxide, 17.3% in CO2 and so on. So there we go. Bit of government, had a government meeting in Copenhagen. Ooh, bit of congestion charge, good idea. Reduces the emissions, why don't we all do that? Well, here we are in Manchester. 84% of people in Salford voted against the congestion charge in Manchester. In fact, there's no district that thought it was anywhere near. I mean, if these are election results, I mean, you'd shoot yourself. 16%, 17, 18% of people in favour. And yet, clearly, having a congestion charge improves global, your response to global warming. Therefore, people do not see, 40% of the people in Salford do not see that climate is even changing, and a further 50% don't see that it's a particular thing they can contribute to. This is a cartoon. I pick all these things up off the internet. This is a cartoon about Thanksgiving last week in the States, where the idea is that you shouldn't eat meat anymore. You've heard this from the chief scientific advisor. Meat actually gives off more emissions than if you're a vegetarian. So there's a sort of a move towards vegetarianism as part of a carbon reduction. And the dog at the bottom here seems most concerned that we've got a vegetarian future. If you look at the newspapers, and it was on the radio this morning because the director of this institute in the University of East Anglia has now stood down on the fact that these emails about climate change were intercepted, and somebody used the word trick in their email. Those of us who've done experimental science use the word trick every day because we want to convey what we believe to be what the data is showing. And the fact that it was warm in 1300 is not relevant to the fact that the CO2 levels and temperature have changed in the last 100 years. And so you do not show world temperature data from 1300 to the current date. You use the trick that you only show it from 1800 to today. The reason it was warmer in 1300 is due to solar activity, volcanic activity, that is different to what it is at this time. So there's an idea, there's a scandal going on in the Times, whether you believe Rupert Murdoch or not, but the Times. You can buy any number of books in the railway station saying this is all hocus pocus. And in fact, lots of people, including Lord Lawson, Nigel Lawson, the ex-Chancellor of Exchequer, writes books on this sort of stuff, and they sell very well, and he makes lots of money from it. 99% of scientists think this is wrong. The Copenhagen summit itself next week is struggling with the fact that the public are tired of all of this sort of stuff. It hasn't particularly got any warmer, although I must say Salford this morning was very sunny. It hasn't particularly got any warmer, and therefore this must all be hocus pocus. So we've conceived what the problem is, gases in the atmosphere. We've designed a solution. Governments are going to get together and make some laws or do some different activity to solve that, and it isn't working. However, there are some solutions out there that are working. This is the British Wind Energy Association. And this is the status of wind energy here in the UK, where 6% of UK power now could be produced, if the wind blew, by wind turbines. That's reducing the UK emissions of carbon dioxide by 4 megatons, over 4 megatons a year. The UK emits 650 megatons of carbon a year, so 4 is not a huge amount, but at least it's moving that way, and their 2 million home equivalent could be have their energy supplied by renewable energy. You'll also be familiar, again, this is all from the internet at the weekend when I drew this together, 10 new nuclear power stations. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers, I should mention that more often, has suggested we need 20 new nuclear power stations by 2050, but Ed Miliband, the Secretary of State for the Department of Energy and Climate Change, says 10. At least 10 is better than naught. And so that's and whether you like nuclear waste or not, and very few of us would like nuclear waste, it is absolutely irrefutable that nuclear power produces low carbon energy, which is a good thing. Produces waste, which is a bad thing, but depending on how you work out your priorities, this is a good way of reducing the atmospheric problem. And finally, here is an example of a combined heat and power plant in Birmingham, where if you build your own power station and sit on top of it so it keeps you warm as well as lights your lights, you can actually save a lot of money. And so £5 million in a hospital with this 1 megawatt combined heat and power plant provides them not only with electricity but also hot water. And that is a economically sensible thing to do, something that Salford University may have done already and certainly might think of doing. Other universities are thinking of doing, where your demand is sufficient. You meet it from your own needs, and then you get all of your heating more or less for free. When you have a power station by the coast, it just heats the hot water and fish enjoy it. When you heat it in Salford, people enjoy it. So there are some operating solutions that are changing the atmospheric composition. So let me come back to what I've tried to make there, that whether or not it is your love life that you're trying to conceive, design, implement and operate, or whether it's your response to global warming, that you're trying to do, or indeed the Institution of Mechanical Engineers Design Challenge 2009 that you're trying to win with a large cash prize today. This is an excellent way of thinking, and when things don't work, you just go back and say, maybe I conceived the problem wrong, maybe I designed the solution wrong. Good luck to everyone.